Hey gang, it's your old buddy Platt here with another Spirit Series video. Today we're going to focus in on rye whiskey. The simplest way to explain rye whiskey is that here in the U.S., it's a whiskey produced from at least 51% rye in the grain bill. Other grains can be added into it, corn, barley, what have you. Think of bourbon in a roundabout way. Bourbon's 51% corn, but they add in other grains. Rye similar to that, except we just kind of changed the predominant grain and the secondary grains. And like bourbon too is, even though bourbon's 51% minimum corn, most of the mash bills you see will be at least high 60s to low 70s, low to mid 70s on the corn part, and lesser that. Most of the ryes you see out there aren't going to be 51% rye. Most of them will be a little bit higher, and there's some 100% ryes out there too. As far as the complete rules on rye, besides the 51% minimum rye in the grain build, it can't be distilled at higher than 160 proof. Has to go into new oak barrels. Can't go into that barrel at higher than 125 proof. If it's aged for a minimum of 2 years, then it's straight rye whiskey. So similar to bourbon. And like I said, there's a lot of similarities, except we're just changing the predominant grain. In colonial times, with founding this country, actually rye was the predominant whiskey. Part of the reason why that was is, again, most of the immigrants are coming from the British Isles, Northern Europe. They are used to working with barley and rye. There was no corn over there. And when they got here, barley really didn't grow well here, especially in the Northeast. It wasn't plentiful at the time, but rye was. And so that's what they had to use. And again, in the Northeast, it was very popular. Pennsylvania, Maryland specifically, were home to some huge rye distillers and were known for their quality ryes. Later on, when the distillers started moving out south and west, when they got to Kentucky or wherever, now they're coming in contact with the native corn and playing around with that, and they eventually, end up creating bourbon, which kind of became known as our national spirit, because again, there wasn't corn in Europe. Those distillers whose ancestry traced back there never really dealt with corn, so bourbon became a uniquely American thing, where rye kind of became the old thing. Rye, up until Prohibition, was still very popular, though. There were still big distilleries in the East. Actually, a lot of the classic cocktails, a lot of the classic whiskey cocktails we know today were originally rye-based. Whiskey sours, old fashions, Manhattans, what have you. And it wasn't until really Prohibition that rye dropped off the face of the map. Part of it was just changing taste buds after Prohibition. Also, too, the spirit industry, after it came back from Prohibition, was pretty much centered in Kentucky. So again, bourbon and corn-based whiskeys were a bigger deal. Those distilleries in Pennsylvania and Maryland just did not make it after Prohibition. So again, that did not help rye struggles any. Today, though, there is kind of a rye revival, and part of the push for this is because it's a great way to extend product lines. A lot of your big bourbon and Tennessee whiskey manufacturers are now adding rye to their line of products. Wild Turkey, Jim Beam, Jack Daniels, George Dickel's all have ryes. Also, part of it, I think, is due in the last decade or so, the mixology, classic cocktails, people wanting to go back to the original spirit sometimes, again, wanting to try to make those classic whiskey cocktails now with rye, what they were potentially meant to be produced with. So I think that has a lot to do with it. Real quick, something you may or may not know, I just found out in researching this, there's a new style of rye out there, something called Empire Rye. Empire meaning the Empire State of New York. Not really sure legally how the labeling is going on that, if the TTB is going to recognize it, or if it's recognized in NAFTA or any international trade. But the Empire Ryes are made up of at least 75% New York grown rye and cannot go in the barrel higher than 115 proof. So they've tweaked the rules on what we think a traditional rye is. I don't know what the selling point is on New York grown rye, but I'm sure someone up there could give you a sales pitch. Speaking of rye, I do want to talk about an issue I face as a bartender, and something you may interact with yourself, is Canadians and rye, or using the term rye more importantly. I get a lot of Canadians who will come to the bar and ask for a rye and ginger ale. Now, what they're asking for is not this, not what Americans think of rye. It's not 51% minimum rye in the grain bill. What they're really asking for is more of a blend. Today, modern Canadian whiskeys, and we'll do a video on Canadian whiskeys, modern Canadian whiskeys are more blended whiskeys, but their origins were based in a higher rye or a pure rye whiskey. Just through the process of modern agriculture, again, corn has become such a predominant crop, and more importantly, it's a real cheap crop. People started using it more and more in these whiskeys because it's just cheaper. Also adds a certain sweetness to it. Our palates have gotten sweeter over the years. Also, Canada now, their major whiskeys are all pretty much blends, so you're adding in not just corn into the grain bill, but you're adding in neutral grain spirits to the blend. So when they ask for that rye and ginger ale or rye and Coke, what they're really wanting is a CC and Coke, a VO and ginger, Crown and Coke, but not necessarily good old-fashioned high rye whiskey. The particular rye we're going to try today is Old Overholt Straight Rye Whiskey. We know that since we use the term straight rye whiskey, that this has been aged at least 2 years in the barrel. Old Overholt is the oldest whiskey brand in the U.S. It was started in 1810. It was originally produced in Pennsylvania, but like I said, pretty much after Prohibition, all those distilleries went by the wayside, and now this is produced at the Jim Beam production facility, I believe in Claremont, Kentucky. Let's give it a try. Alright. Woo, there's some heat on the nose. Ryes, I notice, it's my personal note, but I think you'll find too, I think tend to have more of a slight reddish hue. I know if they spend a lot of time in the barrel, you'll get a little more red hue on that. Let's give her a try. Woo! Oh yeah, that's got a kick. Really hits the side of the tongue. There's some sweetness up front, but it's more the side of the tongue. Boy, it's got a nice warming feeling. It's only 80 proof, so it's not necessarily higher than Jim Beam or Jack Daniels, but there's just a little more oomph. Hey, we're here. You know, it's letting you know that it's there. When I drink a rye, it makes me think of something my grandfather would drink, an older generation would drink. Again, just something that really kind of sticks with you. This is, I don't want to say the antithesis to Maker's Mark, but Maker's Mark, it's a wheated bourbon. It's a little softer, and this is not that. This will get your attention. But I do get plenty of wood. There's again enough sweetness there. It's not harsh. It just has a kick to it. Oh yeah, that's hearty stuff. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Also, please like the video because it lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them in the comment section, or you can always contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bottoms up.